Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 2, Episode 6. Today I'm speaking with Charles Harrington, who has been reading, teaching, and loving tarot for 25 years. He is the author of guidebooks for the Murder of Crows Tarot, Ferenc Pinter Tarot, Tarot V from Lo Scarabeo, and the new Tarot of the Vampires. His love of the cards and connecting with other readers has manifested in co-hosting podcasts, teaching at conferences, and leading meetups in the San Francisco Bay Area. In his free time, he loves to find new and strange ways to use the cards in pursuit of wisdom, fun, and the occasional free cocktail. I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to Charles, and I think you're going to enjoy listening to our conversation. I'm going to take you to that now. Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 2, Episode 6. Today I'm speaking with Charles Harrington, who has been reading, teaching, and loving tarot for 25 years. He is the author of the new tarot deck, the Tarot of the Vampires. Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dean. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to talk with you today.
I'm very excited to talk to you too. Now, are you from here in the Bay Area, or where are you from originally?
Yep. I've lived in the Bay Area my whole life, the East Bay, and for a very brief period, I went to college in San Jose, but I have not gotten far, as you can tell, from the Bay.
Very nice. What time? When did you kind of start? When did you get into paganism? When did you kind of like have a realization that you were pagan?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It happened gradually for me, and actually for me, tarot was sort of the safer gateway. I grew up Lutheran, and I went to a Baptist junior high, so I had a lot of thoughts about rapture.
Hi.
I am so sorry. I guess my
You're totally
internet
good.
went out all of a sudden. Okay.
No, that happens
When
sometimes.
I'll take that question from the top.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, paganism for me was a gradual process. I had a Christian upbringing, although my parents are lovely about it and never pushed too much of any of that. But I also went to a Baptist junior high, so I was a little scared of everything paganism. I was very attracted to it at a young age and everything witchy, but it was a long time before I really allowed myself to get into it. At 15, I did buy a deck of tarot cards. That was sort of a gateway for me to be a practitioner and to sort of go cool turkey and dip my toes in. I didn't allow myself to fully practice paganism until I was just starting college, about the age of 19. I was using Cunningham's the guide for the solitary practitioner, and I did my first ritual, which was early in that book, there's a sort of declaration, or it's not the initiation, it's the before that. What is dedication? The dedication ritual, yeah. And shortly after that, I found a tradition in the Bay Area to teach me more, and I became a practicing a sort of eclectic Wiccan soon after, and it's been 20 years of wonderful magic since.
Without being specific, for a lot of people, I know that I waited for years to belong to a coven, and I think I didn't finally get to belong to one until I was pagan for several years. But not everybody gets to, and many people don't. Did you find it changed things for you a little bit to belong to a coven?
It absolutely did. I am such an extrovert, which is very weird in the tarot world. A little less weird in paganism, but I am an extrovert, and it really was helpful for me to be in a group. And in pop culture, in all witch pop culture, it seems covens are usually kind of bad, and the hero of the story is a gifted natural solitary witch, and like working with a coven is always bad, and that's an interesting narrative to do in fiction. But
Yeah,
I've had a wonderful experience in the various groups that I've joined. I'm still in the same coven 22 some odd years after initiating into it, and 19 years since initiating into it, and I've
that's
had
quite
joined other
impressive,
groups.
actually.
It's so the thing about being in coven is the interpersonal piece of it is so important. It's not just the lore and having your book of shadows and knowing the rituals. It's you have to understand group dynamics, and I was very fortunate my high priestess was versed in group dynamics. And there's an incredible book my coven later read by Starhawk called The Empowerment Manual. Have you read? Are you familiar with that?
No, I missed that one.
It's about consensus-based groups. Starhawk wrote it after like the Occupy Wall Street movement kind of got going.
Hmm.
And if your coven's having any troubles, if anyone listening to this, it is an incredible resource for how to work through any difficulties and any challenges.
I think things like that are so important, and unfortunately, a lot of groups miss that. And I think it's really good to know about resources like that. And something
Mm.
I think I want to help, really tout that. Have you, it sounds like your parents are pretty positive about your spiritual path. Have you ever had any negative consequences from being pagan?
You know, uh not not too bad. I sometimes reflect on how weird I was as like a teenager in early 20s, and without realizing it, I thought I was everything I was into was kind of cool, and like including like tarot and witchcraft. And later I realized like, oh, that's odd. Living in the Bay Area, I've been very fortunate, and also in the kind of job that I've had, I work in communications, which is vastly like public relations, very like vastly female dominated space, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. I've never had anyone give me any trouble for being pagan. It's always been celebrated. People get excited that I know tarot cards. They want a reading, they want to hear more, and I've uh, always had wonderful experiences being like out of the quote unquote broom closet
Yeah.
in this area.
So I want to ask you, I want to talk to you about you did meetups for pagans in the Bay Area. Can you talk a little
Mhm.
about that and what your time was like doing that?
Yeah. So my tradition, the Order of the Sacred Grove, uh, what used to host some merry meets, was what we call them because we like puns. And we part of it sort of started as like, we just every once in a while needed to find apprentices. And so we would host events where we would teach something and get together with local pagans. And then I met other people in this area doing similar things throughout the years. And I was really into hosting free tarot workshops every month at a local pagan store for many years. And I also hosted a circle for the goddess Isis. And it's always been important for me that people have a place to go within paganism or tarot to get together with others that has a really low bar for them. And these were free events, which helped people, just dive in, dip into it. And I'm not opposed to people charging for memberships to things, people
Yeah.
charging memberships or any of that. There's a solid reason for that, but also just it helps create community to have a space for people to show up and try something out, and just having it be a free space really contributed to that community feeling. And after a couple of years, my tea and tarot meetup in the Bay Area was just, it really felt uh, it had that kind of family-like quality that a coven can grow to have.
You have a very nice speaking voice, and I think it's no accident that you have been a co-host in some podcasts. Can you talk about those podcasts a little bit?
It's very good. And as a matter of fact, I'm trying to realize, am I trying to sometimes I deepen my voice a little bit when I know I'm being recorded, and I try and sound like Kevin Conroy. But I had some fun doing two podcasts. One of them is still going. I'm not on it anymore. Tarot Visions, which
Oh,
is a tarot podcast hosted by the amazing Rose Red, and you can find that wherever fine podcasts are sold. But and then I also briefly was on one called Amethyst Oracle, divination with a queer twist. So it's a purely divination podcast. So they're both
yeah.
fun. I think for myself and Rose, one of the secrets was like a great way to get to talk to tarot people, to tarot leaders and luminaries, is to say, "Hey, can I interview you?" And we get to talk to all your heroes and just ask them questions for an hour. And that was a lot of fun. And we also got to do, sometimes I think especially tarot lends itself really well to a podcast, in that, well, no, it's terrible for a podcast, no one can see the cards, but if you get past that, sometimes you just want to try different stuff, and a podcast format lets you do it. For example, Rose Red and I wanted to try how much better or worse do we get reading tarot cards the drunker we got. And so we got to we turned the mic on,
My
and I
God.
made Mai Tais, the original recipe, and we drank those, and we came to the conclusion that about 2.5 Mai Tais in, we had this hit the sweet spot between openness and articulation, and much beyond that, it's not so great. But what's wild is that, I mean, I've read tarot cards in bars before, but when you go back and listen to yourself, you're like, oh, okay, that's the point at which this became less useful.
If you can't pronounce the word Hierophant, I think it's time to stop,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good litmus test. Yeah.
Have you, when you said at 15 you got your first set of tarot cards. Did you feel like
Yeah.
an instant affinity for divination?
You know, I think that I did. Okay, there was a computer game way back called Quest for Glory: Shadows of Darkness. It was in a series, and the in computer games, divination is a great way to lead the player around. And they had these highly complex tarot card readings in there because the creators are tarot readers themselves. And I felt like once I got my first tarot deck that, like, based on just having played that game, I could read about half the cards in the deck. And I picked up my first tarot deck, the Aquarian Tarot, at a game store, like a board game store in the mall when I was 15, and I've loved it ever since. Um, and I think you asked, like, do I have an affinity for it? Some people I know, like, they are just clairvoyant and they can dream true, and they just have absolute faith in that. For me, I love reading tarot, and I love reading tarot predictively.
Yeah.
And I think the older I got, some doubts started to creep in, and my method of dealing with that, I just keep testing the tarot and keep recording my successes and failures just to keep me honest about it. I still read tarot predictively, because it seems to work.
You've been teaching tarot for several years. Do you have any tips for people that are looking into exploring tarot?
I do. One of the Okay, there's so many books on there that tell you
Yeah.
about the cards, and actually, tarot books have come such a long way. When I was starting out, we had the little white book, the LWB, and it would every tarot deck came with this tiny little pamphlet, and it would have one sentence about, like, upright, and one sentence about reversed meanings. So you'd be like, three of wands, and you'd get to it, and it would be like, enterprise, fidelity, communications, searching for stuff, and something like that. And you're like, a snippet, and it's a publishing restriction, because that was what they could include at the time. They couldn't print anything bigger than that.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that today, tarot guidebooks have come so far, and so pretty much for most decks out there, you no longer get the little white book. You get, in the case of Tarot of the Vampires, you get a full color, big book with a full page dedicated to each card, which is that's still limiting, but it's a lot better. And Lo Scarabeo decks also come with a pretty robust guidebook. So one is read the book, read the manual, because I think a lot of people sort of stress in just purely an intuitive tarot. It's really easy to teach and it's good and it has its place. But read the guidebook. Also, when you're looking for, if you go to a bookstore and they have several books on tarot, my recommendation is to pick a random card and not one of the main ones. Like, like pick a minor arcana card, the Three of Cups, something. Read the description for that card in different books, and the book for you is the one that's going to make sense to you. It's the one where the author's position on life is going to resonate with what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And that's going to go in. My other, there's so many of these. I'm going to keep it tight, and you can let me know if you need it, if you want any more. The tarot journal is so important for several reasons. It can be electronic. It can be a fancy journal. I like purchasing fancy journals and I like using them. But what writing your reading down does is it forces you to give yourself a full reading like you would for another person. Sometimes you're like, okay, should I do this thing? Turn over cards. Okay, Hierophant. Yes. Okay. Three of Cups. All right. Queen of Swords. All right. Yeah. And you sort of know, but when you have to write out the meaning in like in the past, Three of Cups, it makes you give yourself fully the kind of reading you would give someone else. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You've been part of writing pamphlets for tarot decks, and you've created a tarot deck. Did you ever think, when you were starting out that you would, or along the way even, did you ever think that one day you would produce your own tarot deck or have a part in creating them?
Oh man, I did not. And it's funny. There was kind of a period in the early 2000s where like it felt like every tarot reader of a certain level was supposed to have their own tarot deck. And
Yeah.
that we were all making them out of collage back then, unless you were really good at Photoshop. And I just didn't think I had a full deck in me. Like I didn't have anything to say about this. And what happened was I was corresponding with a friend of mine who later became my editor. And we were talking about, she was showing me a tarot card image for a deck she just got. And I wrote kind of a lengthy write-up about what I thought of the art. It was, why it was a version of the moon card. And like, it's so interesting. They capture kind of the modern and the older style version interpretation of the moon and how they did this and her hand in this. And she just wrote back with one sentence, like, have you ever thought about writing a tarot deck? And I immediately said, no. I just don't have like one, concept of the entire universe that needs to be explored in this big way philosophically. And she replied, I'll never forget this. She replied, oh, that's not what we want. We're working, this is for Llewellyn. She's like, we're looking to do a cat tarot or a vampire tarot. That's what we want. And in that moment, I was like, I can do this because I know from vampires. I'm such a vampire fan for forever. And I knew what kind of deck I wanted to see that hadn't been created yet. There's so many good vampire decks out there, and there's a few not so good, but there's a few of them, and they'd all cover different spaces. But most vampire decks they cover kind of what I think of as like the Carpathian vampire or like the Victorian vampire, sort of
Yeah.
pre-Dracula, women in long gowns running away from pale vampires, and everything's like in crumbling castles and shrouds. And what that leaves out is sort of modern vampire fiction, sort of post Anne Rice, sort of post Laurel K. Hamilton vampire fiction. And I had the great fortune, I hope it's okay to talk about this now. I had the great fortune to have attended a workshop at Pantheacon by the late, great Margot Adler.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she so your listeners probably know her from her book Drawing Down the Moon, which is an
Yeah.
incredible book and changed paganism forever.
Yeah.
it's an incredible book, but she had her husband had passed away recently at the time. And to deal with that, she, in the course of like a year or two, read something like 300 vampire novels.
Wow.
And yeah,
That's a
like
lot.
what
Yeah.
it was a lot. It was several hundred vampire novels, I think, and over a couple of years. And she had kind of formulated the theory of what she referred to as the moral vampire, which is in how do I put this? Okay, I know how to put this. I read about this. Okay, in modern vampire fiction, you have the good vampire for the pre Anne Rice. The vampire was the villain. It's the monster. It had to be killed, right? And then you have like Louis or Lestat or something like I Love True Blood. So you have like Jessica and Bill. These characters who are very powerful and very dangerous, trying hard to be moral, and that is a wonderful metaphor for modern humans. We are very powerful. We have a lot of access. Technology has made us live a long time and get
Yeah.
things easily, but we also drain the planet and each other and ourselves and ourselves easily. And there is a concept that we need to like be careful and we need to be thoughtful in this world that we've created that we have so much power over. So her concept, and it's an incredible book. It's actually she wrote a book about this called Vampires Are Us. It's not my favorite title. The Vampires Are Us has both her theory of the moral vampire and also her reviews of all of those books that she read. So if you're into vampire fiction, it's an incredible resource if you're looking for new books to get her take on them. She's very thoughtful. And also, I really think that her theory of the modern vampire explains kind of the appeal that shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer have and why they resonate so strongly with us today. Um, so that's a very long way of answering saying no, I didn't expect to be writing a tarot guidebook, and what I really didn't expect was so I created a pitch for Tarot of the Vampires and what I wanted to be, what all 78 cards would include and all of that. And we can dive into that maybe later. But Lo Scarabeo, which is another wonderful tarot publisher, reached out to Barbara to find a writer for their deck that they were creating called Murder of Crows Tarot.
Yeah.
And Barbara wasn't available, but she passed me along. So before Tarot of the Vampires was created, I actually did several other guidebooks for other decks. It's a very different process. Maybe we can talk about the difference of the process later, but it's a very different process. And it is weird this day that I have a page on Amazon for my guidebooks for the decks that I've worked on together with others.
I mean, you get it. You've done a considerable amount. I mean, it's not just a couple. It's like you've done quite a few tarot guidebooks.
Yeah, it's fun. So Tarot of the Vampires is like my baby from like beginning to end.
Yeah.
And in partnership with Craig Moore, we co-parented that deck. And we made all the decisions. For Lo Scarabeo decks, it's a very different process. They send you an art file. They've completed the art for every single card. There's no changing any of it. And go. And they will give you like a hint. And that is helpful. It's there's frustrating things about that, but they do not want to get in the way of the creator's process, the writer's process for working the cards. And here's what's wild to me. So you go to if you've ever gone to a tarot conference or and you take tarot workshops, there's all of these like skills they'll have you do, or some books will have you do to try and interrogate a tarot card that maybe you're having trouble with. So there's like be a character in the scene. How does that go? What's smelling? What are you going on? If this card was a color, if this card was a job, what if this card, all of those skills, they're like, when you're reading for someone one-to-one, you're not like often drawing on all of those, but they've helped, it's like doing all the crunches and sit-ups and push-ups, before a sporting event, I guess. But when you're writing a tarot guidebook, all of those skills come into play. You have to because you have to imagine that this card could be pulled for any situation, for any question, in any position. and what you have to find something to say about that card that is true to the tradition that it's in, and all of the pretty much all the tarot decks I've worked on have been in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. It has to be marry the meaning with the art. I think we've all maybe experienced like looking at a guidebook and reading and looking at the card again, looking at the guidebook and being like, I don't think these two
Yeah,
go together, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And you're like, wow. So no, that can't happen, because then you haven't guided them anywhere, right? And so it has to do that, and it has to be broadly applicable. So sometimes you've read a guidebook and the meaning seems to like be very certain that your finances are in play, and there's like a financial investment that you have to make, and you're like, I'm just asking about like the family reunion, like I'm not trying to invest in anything, so
Yeah.
I think it has to do those three things really well. And if it's a theme deck like Tarot of the Vampires, or actually any of the ones I've worked on could probably be considered themed decks, um, it has to use the theme to help the reader give it, connect with the divination. And so just an example, like with vampires, there's certain things we know about vampires.
Right.
They have certain powers and stories. So they can turn into mist, for example. Okay, where in the Rider-Waite-Smith does turning into mist help the reader? And for me, I think of the Page of Swords as kind of a sneaky character. They kind of get in and behind the scenes and check things out and look for secrets. And for me, that was where that ability would be a useful way for like the reader to piggyback off of their vampire knowledge to better understand the tarot card meaning. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. How did so did you just start off collaborating with Craig Marr, or did he already have a
Oh,
lot of the designs created?
yeah, no. So I came in, I was the very beginning. So I for Tarot
Right.
of the Vampires, I wrote a script for 78 cards, kind of a brief one. And a woman seated with two panthers on a chaise lounge, she's holding an ankh staff, blah blah blah. She looks like Justine Baker, the dancer, kind of thing. And then we Barbara Moore, my editor, and I got to look at she would find different artists' portfolios. And for the kind of deck I was writing, I needed someone who could draw amazing people, someone who could draw animals realistically, which is hard, and could draw full scenes, not just characters, but full scenic illustrations. And we tried a few different we looked at a few different people, and it just kind of like, okay, that could be fine. And I saw Craig Marr's art, and I was like, this guy gets it. I love that he drew beautifully diverse characters. Um, uh, Not just one, racially diverse, different ages, different everything, and two, sometimes you get a tarot deck and everyone has what we call same face.
Yeah.
Like all the women look the same in the tarot deck, and that can happen in vampire decks, right? When like there's like when everybody's pale and tragic. He knew how to make really diverse people come alive in his art. And so I was like, match made in heaven. Luckily he said yes to the project. And here's what's amazing. For a tarot writer, I'm not an illustrator. I don't have that skill. So I would write something, and Craig knew how to take what I was thinking and writing about, and like present it in a portrait format, right? Like most people think in landscape, I think, and I think of a scene. I'm imagining a scene. He knew how to get all of the elements just right in that excuse me, in that way. And of course, so many things that are in the cards came from Craig and not from me. And like he would. Sorry, hang on.
No, it's good.
Can we
We
edit
can
this
edit. We can
out?
edit anything
Okay,
out
hang
too.
on. Okay, hang on. I'm just gonna take a glass of water. I think I'm getting kind of. So Craig would has it. So as the writer for the tarot deck, I, come up with these scenes. I have kind of a vague idea of what it looks like, or in my head, I have an idea of what it looks like. But Craig knows how to present visual storytelling in a way that I just don't, and he would capture all of what I am trying to do and like take it to the next level with the characters. And I think people think in scenes like horizontal, kind of scenic, like you're watching a movie. And the tarot cards are in this tall, portraiture kind of format, and Craig is so beautifully get all of the elements arranged perfectly in each of these things. And also, he sometimes I think I diverged more from the Rider-Waite Smith than I thought, and Craig was great about keep making sure some of those familiar elements that people would be looking for appear in the card. Just as an example, I think the Three of Wands in my deck, it's this vampire, and she's using this. The wands suit are vampires who use blood magic. So she's created like 3 incense sticks that she's using the smoke to entice her next victim, and he's sort of behind her breathing in the smoke. And he when in his notes he had made the incense burner into a boat because the like a Egyptian boat sort of shape, because he knew people, some tarot readers would be looking for that. I was really appreciated that. And then sometimes as the writer I have an idea, but I don't, like, I would go into my editor. I had the idea for the strength card. Vampires must always sort of be a moral vampire. The hero vampire is always struggling against their hunger. They do not want to just be an animal. And in the strength in the tarot, often we see the woman closing the mouth of the lion and having
Yeah.
that power over inner saboteur. But my idea, it was this blood hunger, and that the the woman in the strength card would show like in her chest like a lion's face made of blood. And I remember writing to the editor and being, well, how the hell would anyone do that? That sounds like crazy. Like I can't even imagine. She's like, that's Craig's job. Craig can do it, and he did a phenomenal job with that card. It just the animalistic rage from the strength card, it kind of pouring out. And there was another card that was a favorite of mine, is the Four of Wands, is a vampire in a club at night, and she can hear everyone's heartbeats, and everyone's hearts and veins are glowing through their chests. And I was trying to figure out how you would stage this. I would like take like a sketch paper and just like try and put stick figures of and I didn't know what I was doing. And again, Barbara was like, we trust Craig on this, and he did a phenomenal job of capturing that scene and making sure some of the hearts are absolutely super detailed. Some of them are implied in that card, and so it does look like the thumpa thumpa music of the club is these beating, glowing hearts that the vampire is aware of. And so it's incredible to get to work with an illustrator. So when you're not alone anymore, and it just you have a partner, and also it keeps the tarot deck from being too much just one person's vision. And
Yeah.
I remember when we were working on the cards, I was just reaching out to Craig and like, is there anything you think we're missing? And he felt that we had a lot of like modern vampire fiction. Most of the vampires look human, they pass as human, their fangs aren't out all the time. And we kind of mastered that with these beautiful vampires. But he was kind of interested in exploring more the monstrous side of the vampires,
Yeah.
like bestial kind of things. And so several cards were changed after that to kind of, in particular, the Devil card. I'd written as
Yeah.
sort of like, it's a vampire lord who's, instead of chains, he's offering his blood to the 2 main characters in the major arcana, and that appear in the Fool. And I'd written him as sort of like, I thought I was being subtle, that there's that famous painting of Vlad Tepes, who became
Yeah.
Vlad Dracula, that we all think of with a crazy mustache. And I was just like, I'd written it to be like him if he was alive today, and kind of a hard rock kind of guy. And Craig was like, I think we go more in this, and he created this like bat creature, ancient kind of, I think, that came from like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and others.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking that too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this idea that if you're a vampire long enough, you sort of become more unhuman. And
Yeah.
also I'd say in Bram Stoker's Dracula or Gary Oldman, he can turn
Yeah.
into these creatures. So that devil card is way more nightmarish because he um, had the sense that like there wasn't enough monstrous vampire representation in the deck. He was absolutely right. And then also some cards he would take them in a different direction. I had in the Two of Cups a mortal offering his wrist to a vampire, and I had that she looked pensive and he looks confident. And Craig switched that, very smart, because the Two of Cups is about vulnerability and a human offering their blood to the vampire. That's the vulnerable position, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So uh, that process was wonderful to get to have on Terror of the Vampires, and it's very much him co-creating that world with me. But working on a guidebook for Lo Scarabeo, you don't have that. You are using all of your tarot skills and to create the guidebook and to figure out the cards and to interrogate each card, and that's also a wonderful process, and it allows um, so it also has an element of the artist has a vision, the writer has a vision, and you're kind of marrying the two
Yeah.
to have the final deck.
With the Codex of the Vampires in the Tarot of the Vampires, I really got a sense that you were writing this as a love letter to everybody who's ever gotten a tarot deck and really hated the book that they got that came with it. Because this has everything that you want. This has like, basically an introduction to the history of tarot, which, isn't always on in those. It has different spreads. And then you really go over the cards in it too, which again, you don't always get. Some of them will do like, this is the wands and this is the cups, and that kind of thing. So do you want to talk about it? Because it really seemed that you were writing this for people who love tarot decks.
Yes. So here's a wacky statistic for you. 8 out of every 10 tarot decks purchased are someone's first tarot deck.
Yeah.
So most people have one deck, right? And most people who buy a tarot deck, especially when you're starting out, you don't have a whole library of things. You're not going on the internet. So the tarot book, the tarot guidebook has to be complete in its information, and it has to give you information in a way that is going to work in the real world and not just be theoretical or esoteric.
Yeah.
And those things are wonderful. But look, I'm really fortunate that I waited, 20 something years into my tarot reading career before writing a guidebook, because I just didn't have the knowledge for a long time that of what it's really like when someone sits down. But also tarot guidebooks are fun in the sense that people tend not to read them cover to cover. They might read the opening sections that are like, what is tarot? What is a spread? But then they're going to go card, one at a time. Like, okay, I got the King of Wands in my reading. I'm going to look that up. So I can't count on the reader having read the section on wands or the section on kings. Like, it has to be presented again fresh in that moment and clearly, and they they all have to work together. So just if you look at, like, for example, just the court cards and the codex of the vampires, it's a little formulaic, and that's intentional, so that if you're learning the court cards, the same kind of information is, what's this vampire doing, but also what are kings like, what happens when you are the king of wands in particular, how does this, and boom boom boom, and that information is similar, for each of the court cards, so that it's consistent and hopefully coherent for the reader. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I
I
loved
will
the
say,
artwork too, because I thought the artwork was just each one of the cards was very three-dimensional in the fact that you read it and you kind of get drawn into it a little bit. And I really love that. There was no like repetition here where anything kind of looked like anything else. Each one almost kind of inspires a story, and there seemed to almost be kind of a story or a series of stories. I could see this like making a hell of a book series. Did that kind of come to you at all when you were looking at the artwork?
oh, I'm really glad you said that. Two, the not having repetition, I think that, like, that was important for us because there's a lot of in vampire lore, there's certain things that kind of appear over and over, and that were going to appear a couple times on cards. And it was important that like every time you see a coffin in the deck, it needed to be different. So just thinking the four of one, sorry, the four of swords and the four of pentacles both have coffins on them, but they look very, very different for this reason, that they, because one, the pentacles one has to seem very pentacles. It's like a steampunk trap device that keep like
Yeah.
a vault keeping everyone out. Whereas in the four of swords, it's a glass coffin. It's open. It's a little lighter and breezier, and she can leave when she wants. So one, that's Craig did just a phenomenal job of making all the characters look different, and making sure that, you know, they that most people are going to find themselves in this deck somehow. And then two, and then the story. Some texts tell stories across, like a suit will tell one story. The Necronomicon did this. The Tarot Art Nouveau did this. The Mythic Tarot did this, and we didn't want to go that. That can be a little limiting if it's too strictly done. But I wanted to tell the story of the major arcana. I think a lot of people know is called the Fool's Journey, and the idea is the fool starts out at 0 and innocent, and then goes through all these different spiritual initiations and processes to become the world. So I thought that was a cool story, and I wanted to tell the story of a young woman becoming a powerful vampire. And so she appears on certain cards with the Fool, and she meets her vampire love in the Fool, and they interact across a couple cards. In the Death card, it's her dying and being reborn. He's about to give her his blood, and then they are at the I don't know, at the they're imperiled by the devil card, and they rise up, and this is not a spoiler, I think. In the Judgment card, they slay him, and she is sort of a fully capable, ideal moral vampire per the Margot Adler model. And we kind of the simple symbolism we use throughout the deck is lilies and roses. Lilies representing mortality and vulnerability, and roses representing like the passion and the vampire, and that's also they're a key tarot symbol, that one of the few that kind of made it into the deck. As far as telling a story, she has a particular story, but everyone else I wanted to keep really open. And I think that vampire fans will be able to see some of these cards and imagine the stories for these characters. And one of the reasons that the Fool character isn't in all of the major arcana is I think it's really important for people to have a lot of different characters for them to interact with and fall in love with, and their favorite might not be those two. So, and often in vampire shows, the lead has to be, you know, so everything for the story that, like, usually it's the side characters we fall in love with.
Yeah.
So it's important to have lots of those characters and to have like lots of different vampires. It's also important for us. So whenever you read a new vampire novel, somewhere at the beginning, a vampire explains, like, oh no, we can't turn into mist. That's ridiculous. We don't turn into bats. That's ridiculous. And they have to, because an author telling a story has to create certain limitations for their world. And all of the vampire abilities won't work. They'd be too powerful. Dracula's crazy powerful in that book. So in our world, I think Craig and I decided, oh no, all of the powers exist, but not all the vampires have them. So it was we wanted to play on different kinds of vampire fiction. So there's psychic vampires in the deck. There's like nightmare vampires in the deck. There's different kinds of vampires, so that we could be representing a lot of different types of vampire fiction.
Do you have any favorite vampire films or books?
Yeah, okay. The first one that always comes to mind is Blood-Sucking Fiends by Christopher Moore.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He's a great one. So it's for the Bay Area. It takes place there. I think there's a trilogy. The first one is my favorite. And that has actually, that's where my Four of Wands kind of comes from. There's a moment. So Jody is a young woman who's kind of been made into a vampire, and she's trying to make sense of it. And there's a point at which she really embraces it, and that's what we hope to capture in the Four of Wands. So I love it as a vampire story. It's light, it's silly, it's wacky. But in terms of I am a big fan of the Anne Rice Chronicles. They are weighty tomes. But they're I think they're pretty important. I always liked the fiction associated with the role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade.
Oh yeah.
So I love that was helpful when you need a lot of different vampires, like the different vampire clans from the Masquerade were helpful. And in terms of movies, okay, I really really love the Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula 100%. But I also love how that movie is or that story rather has been reinvented in the modern age. And it's kind of wild. In the guidebook, I talk a little about shadow work, like Jungian shadow work,
Yeah.
where so the vampire is always a powerful way that every culture projects its shadow, its fears, and its whatever's everything it finds unbearable about itself. It projects it into its vampires. So famously, Bram Stoker's Dracula. You have the Count is a European an Eastern European aristocrat, who's bringing literal tainted boxes of dirt to merry old England, and he's preying on virtuous women. And that's if you know about the history of England at the around the turn of the 18th to 19th, sorry, 19th to 20th century, that like England was an imperialist country invading
Yeah.
other places, taking over, and it had a real issue with sexuality. And in London, 1 out of 6 women is working in some sort of sex work, and so all of that is interesting to me as how like he is their shadow. And then Dracula was recreated twice in the last 2 years. Once for The Invitation, which is an amazing film, where in that one the vampire is he's a sensitive guy, he's a loving guy who really gets into the lead character's head, and he's anti-racist, and he's feminist, and you're like, oh, I'm on board. And then it turns out, oh, he's Dracula. And it was all an act. So it's the sort of the white savior kind of pretender guy. And then I have to say, Renfield, I don't know if you've got to see Renfield with
Not yet. I want to.
yeah.
That
In
looks
that
great.
one, the premise, without giving anything away, Nicholas Hoult plays Renfield, and Nicolas Cage plays an amazing scenery chewing Dracula. In that one, the vampire is a narcissist, and Nicholas Hoult is going to a support group for people who are around narcissists and toxic people. And I think that's a really useful metaphor for our time, like a shadow for our time, because we are obsessed with the idea of narcissists and obsessed with the idea of like toxic people, and their effects on us. But also, we live in kind of a narcissistic age, and social media has made us feel very, very good, very important, and like we're all supposed to be like telling everybody about ourselves. So, I find that I just love the way that new vampire films find our shadow, find our culture's various shadows, and explore mental health, queer storylines, just women's sexuality in a big way since the beginning. Um, Using the vampire as this powerful symbol.
Now that the Vampire's Tarot is out, or sorry, now that the Tarot of the Vampires is out,
Mhm.
what's next for you?
This deck has been like 4 years in the making, and I'm so
Wow.
excited that it's out. Yeah, I wrote
I can see
I
that
wrote.
though. That makes
Mhm.
sense. I'm glad because like it seems like it's something that took that long.
It is so like that's from the very first pitch. And Craig took incredible care with the artwork, and we were very collaborative. Sorry, we would work together. I mean, his senses are amazing, and he does fantastic work on the cards. So it took a long time, 4 years later. So I'm excited to take a long breather. I do have a couple of projects I've been working on. I'm working on Llewellyn's tarot calendars.
Oh, nice.
It's kind of like the witch's calendar. Sort of like a mini essay every month. So I'm working on the 2025 tarot calendar. They're a lot of fun, and if you have a tarot practice, you want to change things up. There's all kinds of cool spreads or things for you to try every month to create some variance in your tarot life. It's really good. Their line, not mine. We'll see about mine. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to just sort of see how during this spooky season people embrace the vampires. So my focus is still there. I'm trying to promote it a little more, but I hope that people, as the nights grow longer, have fun with the vampires this season.
I think they will. And I recommend anybody that is shopping for a new tarot deck to pick this one up. You're going to really love it. Charles, thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you getting a chance to talk with me today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, Dean.
That was my conversation with Charles Harrington, author of The Tarot of the Vampires. Next week, we'll be speaking with Laurel Woodward with their new book, Wellness Witchery, a Magical Approach to Nourishing the Body, Mind, and Spirit. Until then, I hope you have a blessed week.